Welcome to an introduction to the word mapping strategy. This is the first in a three-part video series that presents the information you will need to instruct your students in the word mapping strategy, which is one of the strategies in the strategic instruction model designed by the University of Kansas Center for Research on Learning. Along with this video series, the shared link provides note sheets and supplemental items that will be useful to you as you view the videos and later as you teach the strategy. Once again, welcome to word mapping. It's an important strategy because a student's world is filled with words. Matter of fact, every class a student enters has its own set of specialized words. Words are everywhere. The average fifth grader encounters 10,000 new words in the school year. 10,000. That's an enormous amount. More than half, however, are related to familiar words or stems. It's important that students learn to automatically see the relationship of these new words to the more familiar parts within them. Every course has critical vocabulary words that students have most likely never seen before. Here are just a few examples of words that students encounter in their various courses. A lot of these words, though, have smaller word parts that could be helpful in figuring out their meanings. For example, look at how many words have the suffix pronounced shun, T-I-O-N. The suffix shun means the act or result of, so all of these words indicate an act or a result. For example, transformation means the result of transforming. Teaching common word parts is the first step in unlocking the meanings of unknown words. Students need to be taught a strategy that helps them see the relationship of word parts and how to put the word parts together to figure out new words. They need to be taught how to think about words. The word mapping strategy was designed to provide students with a plan of attack to use word parts that they know to determine the meanings of words that they don't know. Without this strategy, students rely mostly on context clues to try to figure out what a word means. Can you guess the percentage of time a student can guess the meaning of a word from context clues alone? Well, a student can guess a word from context about 15% of the time. Not nearly as effective as we would hope. However, a sixth grader should be able to infer about 60% of word meanings by combining context clues with a knowledge of word parts. That's quite a bump in the level of effectiveness. We also know from research that understanding words is a major key to comprehension. Matter of fact, the relationship between word knowledge and comprehension is unequivocal. I'm going to show you a passage, and after reading it, I want you to ask yourself this question. How much does my understanding of the words in the passage impact my understanding of the topic that is discussed in the passage? Well, let's find out. Here we go. Push pause and take some time to read this passage, and then push play when you are ready to continue. Well, if you are like me, you may have encountered many words that are unfamiliar to you. As a good reader, you may have stopped to look at a word and use the smaller parts within it to try to figure out its meaning. For example, this word has at least one familiar part to me. That's the first part, which is neuro. I'm pretty sure that part means nerve, so I can infer that the larger word has something to do with the nerves or the nervous system. There are other parts in this word that I could check out too. That's what good readers do. They look for the familiar parts in words to help provide meaning to what they are reading. All readers encounter words they don't know, but skilled readers know how to cope effectively with words that are new to them. The word mapping strategy lays out a step-by-step procedure for teaching students a way to tackle the hundreds and thousands of unknown words that they will encounter. Our next video session will focus on the importance of teaching students word parts or morphemes. It is the first step in preparing them to become strategic thinkers when it comes to words. Welcome to part 2 of the 3-part video series on the word mapping strategy. Today we will be introducing and discussing the first few word mapping lessons. Note sheets for today's session are located in the shared folder and are titled Notes for Part 2 Word Mapping. Feel free to pause now if needed to take time to download the document. You may also want to have the Word Mapping Strategy Instructor's Manual at hand, since it provides all the information and materials that will be discussed in today's video. The information in the manual is organized in these sections. The first section of the manual provides a brief overview of the strategic instruction model, followed by information regarding this specific strategy. It touches upon the research behind the strategy and provides a preview of the instructional sequence teachers are to follow when teaching it. This section is followed by additional sections regarding teaching the strategy and practicing it with students. First is conducting a pretest. The pretest allows you to determine how much prior knowledge students have when it comes to looking for parts of words in new words. The pretest and directions for administering it is in this section. Next is a section devoted to presenting all the information students need to learn the strategy, which is divided into 4 key lessons. This is followed by a section that describes how students will practice the strategy. The next section describes how to conduct a post-test, which will help determine the growth students have made in the area of knowing and applying word part knowledge. This is followed by a section on helping students use the strategy in different settings. Finally, the last section contains additional materials needed to teach the strategy, such as student worksheets that can be reproduced along with their answer keys. During this session, we will focus on the first 3 lessons in the manual. Word Mapping Lesson 1 introduces the concept of morphemes and focuses on the first type of morpheme that students will learn, the prefix. Lesson 2 and 3 follow up with information about suffixes and then roots. Lesson 4 introduces the word mapping strategy, which will teach students how to use their knowledge of prefixes, suffixes, and roots to help them figure out the meanings of unknown words. We will take a deep dive into the actual strategy in our next video session. So let's start at the beginning with Lesson 1. First, a hint to help you complete the note sheets for these lessons. Throughout the remainder of this video, the words in red will help you fill out the blanks in your guided note sheets relating to the 3 lessons we will be discussing. The note sheets are actually the same sheets that you will use with students when you present this information to them. There is also a PowerPoint presentation in your folder titled Word Mapping Morphemes that will allow you to present the following information to your students in the very same way that you are now being introduced to it. So let's get started. Words are made of word parts called morphemes. Morphemes are defined as word parts with meaning. Un is a common morpheme which is seen in a lot of words such as the ones that are listed here on the screen. If we stop to think about the morpheme un, we probably already know that un, when it stands alone, isn't a word, but it does have meaning. It means not, and when added to a word, it changes the word's meaning. Morphemes are different from syllables. Syllables are word parts also, but they are centered on a vowel sound that have no meaning. Syllables help us sound out or say the word. Let's consider the difference between morphemes and syllables. Look at the word unladylike. When you consider the number of syllables in the word, you find it has 4 syllables. I like to tell students to clap out the syllables, unladylike. They can also touch their chins while saying the word to see how many times their chin drops when saying it. In this case, it's 4 times. Syllables help us pronounce a word. But when we look at the word parts with meaning in the word, or the morphemes, we see only 3. Un is the first morpheme and it means not. Then we see lady, which has its own meaning, and next we see like, which also has meaning. The word unladylike has 3 morphemes. There are 3 types of morphemes. The 3 types are prefixes, which are at the beginning of a word, suffixes, which are at the end of a word, and roots, which can be at the beginning, middle, or end of a word. They can also be the entire word. An example of a word that has all 3 types of morphemes is unamicable. It has a prefix, which is un. We already know that un means not. It also has the suffix able, which is pronounced able and means can do or can be done. It has a root right in the middle of the word. The root is amic, and it means love or friend. When you think about the meanings of all those morphemes put together, you come up with a meaning for the entire word. You could guess that unamicable means not able to be loved or not able to be a friend. Learning more about morphemes will help us later when we learn a strategy called the word mapping strategy. It will help us look for the morphemes in words to figure out what new words mean. So let's start by learning more about the first type of morpheme, prefixes. Remember, prefixes are at the beginning of a word and they change the meaning of the word. Some common prefixes are re, dis, and un, and each one of these prefixes has meaning. Re means again or back. It actually has two different meanings. Dis means not, or apart, or away. Notice that it has three different meanings, and we already know that un means not. Some prefixes have more than one meaning, but some have only one. As a personal challenge, you may want to pause for a minute and see how many words you can think of that start with these prefixes. There's a lot of them. But be careful and watch out for tricksters. Tricksters are words that start with the same letters as prefixes, but don't really have a prefix. Can you think of one? Well, check out this word read. It's a familiar word. It looks like it has the prefix re, but does it? No, it actually doesn't. The word is read, not re-add. In this case, re is not the prefix re. It is a part of the word, therefore the word read is a trickster. Also watch out for some words that contain two prefixes. This is called a compound prefix. Both of these words have compound prefixes. If you look up prefixes on the prefix definitions list in the shared folder, you will find that dis, con, and com are all prefixes on the list. As you work with your students on prefixes, you will be using prefix definitions list found in the appendix section of your manual. The list can be found on pages 122 and 123. They are also in the shared folder. You will want to make copies of these lists for your students as you conduct activities with prefixes. You will also find some prefix worksheets on pages 124 through 127 of the manual. When students practice looking for prefixes on their practice worksheets, they will use a backwards L to mark the prefixes. For example, when looking for a prefix in the word extracting, we see it has the prefix ex, pronounced X. The backwards L is used to identify that prefix. By the way, if you check the prefix definitions list, you will see that the prefix X means take out. When it is added to the other word parts, tract, which means pull, and ing, which means the act of, we can figure out that the word extracting means the act of pulling or taking out. Now let's shift our focus to Lesson 2, which provides a crash course on the second type of morphemes, suffixes. Suffixes are morphemes that are at the end of a word. A word that has the suffix able, pronounced able, is lovable. The suffix able means can do or can be done. Therefore, lovable means can be loved. There are actually two types of suffixes. They are inflectional and derivational. Inflectional suffixes don't change the meaning of the word, but they change number, point of view, tense, or they show possession or comparison. For example, the suffix s means more than one. If we add an s to the words book, teacher, banana, or car, we haven't changed the meaning of the words, just the number. Some inflectional suffixes change point of view. The suffix s can also be added to words to show third person. For example, we say, I walk, you walk, but if we have to say he, she, or it, we add an s to the word walk to show third person. I walk, you walk, he, she, or it walks with an s. Some inflectional suffixes change tense. The suffix ed means past tense. When we add ed to these words, play becomes played, walk becomes walked, start becomes started, and travel becomes traveled. The meaning of the word hasn't changed, but the time frame or tense has changed. And some inflectional suffixes show possession. Apostrophe S is a suffix that shows possession or ownership. Look at the following sentence. Mike's new truck is black. The apostrophe S is added to the word Mike to show that Mike possesses or owns the truck. Inflectional suffixes do not change the meaning of the word. Derivational suffixes, on the other hand, are different because they create a different form of a word, so the meaning of the word is changed. If we add the suffix er to the word teach, it becomes teacher. Teach is something we do, but teacher is a person. If we add the suffix ary to the word diction, it now becomes the word dictionary. Diction is a style of speaking, but dictionary is a book or digital resource that lists words and their definitions. Derivational suffixes do change the meaning of the word. Here's a fun fact. There are 3 suffixes that can act either as an inflectional suffix or a derivational suffix. The 3 suffixes are er, en, and ing. Here are some examples of how each of these suffixes can be used in either way. Sometimes they change the form of the word, which changes the word's meaning, but sometimes they don't change the word's meaning at all. There are some rules when adding suffixes to the end of words. These rules will help students correctly spell words with suffixes. The first set of rules applies to adding suffixes to words that end in y. Have you ever seen any of your students make the mistake of spelling babies, the plural of baby, like this? That happens because students don't know how to handle adding suffixes to words that end in y. Here are the rules that apply in this situation. If the letter before a final y is a vowel, the y doesn't change when you add a suffix. For example, play becomes plain. You just add the ing. However, if the letter before a final y is a consonant, the y changes to an I before you add the suffix. An example would be carry. You change the y to add ed, and it becomes carried with an I. Except when the suffix begins with an I. Then you do not have to change the y. This visual of the rules for handling words that end in y is on page 105 in your instructor's manual. There are also rules when adding suffixes to words that end in a single consonant with a single vowel in front of it. You may have seen students spell the word running like this. They need to learn the suffix rule for this situation. Here are the rules. First, double the consonant if the suffix begins with a vowel. So if we were adding ing to the word fit, we would have to double that T. We don't double the consonant if the suffix begins with a consonant. So fit, when we add nes to it, does not need a double T. There is a visual of these rules on page 106. Many teachers enlarge the suffix rules to hang up in the classroom as visual reminders. Words can have 2 suffixes, and that is called a compound suffix. All of these words have compound suffixes. Can you find them? If not, use the suffix definitions list in the shared folder to check out the list of suffixes and compare them to the word endings you see in these words. As you work with your students on suffixes, you will be using the suffix definition lists found in the appendix section of your manual. The lists can be found on pages 129 through 131. They are also located in the shared folder. You will want to copy these lists for your students to use during activities. You will find some suffix worksheets on pages 132 through 135 in your instructor's manual. When students practice looking for suffixes on their practice worksheets, they will use an L shape to mark the suffixes. For example, when looking for a suffix in the word magnify, we see it has the suffix spelled ify and pronounced ify. The L shape is used to identify that suffix, which, by the way, means to make. When you put that suffix with the other word part, magn, which means large, you can guess the meaning of the word is to make large. We have learned about the morphemes, prefixes, and suffixes. Now let's turn our attention to Lesson 3 and the third type of morpheme, which is roots. And they also have meaning. Roots can be at the beginning, middle, or end of a word. Matter of fact, roots can be the entire word. Scope is a root that can stand on its own and is an entire word, but it can also be at the front of a word when we add the suffix ed at the end to form scoped, or it can be in the middle of the word when we add the prefix micro at the beginning and the suffix ic at the end to form the word microscopic. You will notice that adding the suffix changed the sound of the root just a bit. Or scope can be at the end of the word when we add the suffix tele at the beginning to form the word telescope. A root can be anywhere in the word, or it can be the entire word. If you're wondering about a word's meaning, look for the root. Each root gives a word its main meaning. The root aster means star, but the root astro also means star. Sometimes you will find more than one root that means the same thing. And if you look at all of these words that have either aster or astro in them, you will see that they are words that all relate to stars. The words get their main meaning from the root. Just like other morphemes, some roots have several meanings. The root arch can mean chief, or most important, or rule. Take a look at these three words that have the root arch, what can sometimes be pronounced arc, and see how each one has a slightly different meaning when combined with certain roots. Can you guess which meaning goes with each of the words? I would think that arch in the word archbishop means the chief bishop. The word arch in archenemy could mean the most important enemy. And the word arch, which is pronounced arc in the word matriarch, means rule. Since matre means mother, the word matriarch means mother rules. I personally like that idea. Sometimes different roots can have the same meaning but different forms. An example would be the roots micro and min. They don't look similar, but they have the same meaning. They both mean small. Sometimes different roots can have the same meaning and they look very much alike. They have similar forms. An example would be the roots aster and astro that we discussed earlier. They look a lot alike and they mean the same thing. They both mean star. So roots are very important morphemes because they anchor the word by building the most basic meaning of the word. As you work with your students on roots, you will be using roots definitions lists found in the appendix section of your manual. The lists can be found on pages 137 through 139. They can also be found in the shared folder. You will want to make copies of these for your students as you conduct practice activities with them. You will also find some identifying morphemes worksheets on pages 140 through 143, where students will use the L mark and the backwards L mark to separate the prefixes and isolate suffixes, and then they can underline the roots in the words that they see. Here's a great tip regarding the prefix, suffix, and roots definitions lists. Since the sheets all look the same, color code the sheets that you give to the students so students can easily grab the right one when they need to look up a prefix or a suffix or a root. Here's an example of how one teacher color-coded the sheets. Prefix sheets were pink because prefix and pink both start with P. Root sheets were green because green plants have roots. And suffix sheets were yellow like the sun. Suffix and sun start with S. But actually, you can use any colors you want or have on hand, just so kids don't have to shuffle multiple sheets of paper around to easily spot the list that they need. So let's have a quick review. What are the three types of morphemes? They are prefixes, suffixes, and roots. Helping students discover that the word parts called morphemes are like parts of a word puzzle is important. When we put the meanings of all of the pieces or morphemes together, we can conquer and figure out new words. In the next video, we will be learning the word mapping strategy, which provides a specific way to put knowledge of morphemes to use. Throughout the year, you will use the strategy with your students to figure out the meanings of new words as they also learn more and more prefixes, suffixes, and roots. Welcome to Word Mapping Part 3, the final video in the Word Mapping Strategy series. Note sheets for today's session are located in the shared folder and are titled Notes for Part 3 Word Mapping. Feel free to pause now if needed to take time to download the document. And now let's turn our attention to the strategy. Today we will be focusing on lesson number 4 in the instructor's manual, which introduces the steps of the strategy and starts to lay out ideas for practicing the strategy with your students. We will also consider key parts of the remaining sections of the manual, which includes practice lessons for word parts, the post-test, and recommendations for ensuring that students remember to use the strategy in all settings and situations. So let's get started. As students learn more and more prefixes, suffixes, and roots, they need a step-by-step approach to applying that knowledge to figure out new words. The word mapping strategy provides that step-by-step approach. The steps to the strategy are: map the word parts, attack the meaning of each part, predict the word's meaning, and see if you're right. Look closely and you will notice that each step starts with an action word that prompts the students to do something at each step. You will also notice that the first letters of the steps, when combined, spell out the word MAPS. This word acts as a mnemonic device to help students remember the steps in order. It keeps them on track through the process. So let's take a careful look at each step. The M step stands for Map the Word Parts. This step prompts students to carefully examine the new word and look for any familiar prefixes, suffixes, and roots that are in the word. We ask students to check for prefixes first because they are at the beginning of the words and easier to spot. Then they look at the end of the word for familiar suffix endings. Once they have isolated any prefix or suffix, it is much easier to identify the root of the word. Here are some tips to give your students when looking for prefixes, suffixes, and roots during the M step. First, tip number 1. Tell your students to refer to their word part lists when looking for word parts. They may not want to take the time to look through their lists, but the act of repeatedly using the lists will help them, over time, familiarize themselves with new word parts. Slow them down to ensure that they are making good use of their lists. Next, tip number 2. Tell students this. When you think you have spotted a prefix or suffix, always check at least one more letter to make sure that you found the entire word part. For example, the word democracy looks like it has the prefix DE, pronounced D. But if you go over one more letter, you will see that the actual prefix in this word is DEM, pronounced dem, which means people. If we hadn't tried to include at least one more letter in our search for a prefix, we would never know that the word democracy has something to do with people. The same tip applies when looking for suffixes. The word particle looks like it has the suffix LE, but if you go back one more letter, you find that the suffix is actually CLE. The A step requires students to attack the meaning of each part. The students will record the meanings of each of the word parts they find on their word parts list. Here is a tip to give your students when performing the A step. Since you have to use your word part lists for both steps M and A, combine the steps. When you find a word part and write it on your map, which is the M step, go ahead and write down the meaning of the part 2, which is the A step. You get both steps done at the same time. The P step calls for students to predict the meaning of the new word by putting together the meanings of all of the word parts. The students will make their best guess regarding the meaning of the new word. Here is a tip to give your students when performing the P step. Reading the definitions of the word parts from left to right, which would be the prefix meaning plus the root meaning plus the suffix meaning, may not make sense. It may be a good idea to change the order around and start with the suffix meaning, then the root meaning, and the prefix meaning. Play around with the definitions and arrange them in the order that makes the most sense. The S step reminds students to check to see if their prediction is correct. They need to check the context of the sentence where the word was located and think about the definition they came up with. They should ask themselves, does that definition make sense in this sentence? Of course, they can also check for meaning by using their online dictionaries. Students will practice these map steps when trying to figure out what new words mean. Students will use this visual device, called a word map, to go through the steps. Let me show you how to use this visual map. First, the new word is written in the box provided at the top of the page. Next, for the M step, I use my prefix, suffix, and root lists to look for the parts of the word. Since the lists are in alphabetical order, I begin by looking at the prefix list in the S section. I see that the prefix SYN, pronounced sin, is listed, and I write that down in the box provided for prefix. Since the prefix list also provides the meaning of sin, I'm going to go ahead and do the A step for the prefix and write in the meaning, which is with or together. Now I'm going to check my suffix list. E isn't listed as a suffix. I add another letter and look for ZE. I don't find that either. I'll add one more letter and look for IZE. I found it. That's on the list. I write down that suffix, which is pronounced eyes, and then I also write the meaning down, which is make. Now I am ready to write down my root. The letters that are left after separating the prefix and suffix are CHRON. I think that's pronounced cron. I check my root list for that and I find it, so I write that down in the box for the root. I also write the meaning, which is time. I have now completed the M and A steps, so I am ready to do the P step, which is predict the word's meaning. If I read the word part meanings from left to right, it combines to say, with or together time make. Well, that doesn't make much sense. So I will try it in the other direction from right to left. That combines to say make time together or with. That sounds a little better. I think my prediction will be make time together. Now I can do the S step, see if I'm right. I will replace the word synchronize in this sentence with my prediction and see if it makes sense. The dancers tried to synchronize their steps would now become the dancers tried to make time together their steps. I think it makes some sense, but it doesn't sound quite right. Maybe I could say the dancers tried to make their steps time together. I think that sounds okay. It's getting better. It may sound even better if I say the dancers tried to time their steps together. That sounds good. I could also look up the word synchronize in the dictionary to see if I'm right. Here are some tips for using the word map. If a word has a compound prefix or suffix, divide the box in half like this to make room for both. Another tip. If there are some extra letters in a word that don't fit in any of the boxes, write the letter or letters between the boxes. Many times these letters serve the purpose of making pronunciation easier. One example of this is the word cognition. There's no prefix, so I will draw an X through the prefix boxes to show that there isn't a prefix. There is the suffix tion, shun, so I will write that in the suffix box and fill out the meaning. The root of the word is cogn, and I will write that in the root box and fill in the meaning below it. It means to know. But there is the letter I in the word that didn't go in either the suffix box or the root box. I am going to place that I right in between the boxes. It is probably in the word to make pronunciation easier by connecting the root cogn with the shun suffix. The word is pronounced cognition. Take time to pause the video and try to map 3 of these words using your word part lists and the worksheet that is in your notes packet. It's good practice to familiarize yourself with the steps of the strategy. When you're done, you can hit play again. The instructor's manual also provides ideas for different ways students can practice remembering different word parts and their meanings. Students can develop word part charts like this for different word parts. This chart shows the prefix "un" and its two meanings. Under each meaning, examples of words that apply to that meaning are listed. Tricksters are listed at the bottom. Those words that look like they contain the prefix "un," but the letters "un" are actually part of the main word. Students could also make memory tables to help them remember a morpheme and its meaning. The memory table shows the root, man, in the top left corner, with its meaning, which is hand, written in the top right corner. A memory word that has the root in it is written in the bottom left corner. The example word here is manicure, and a visual representation of that is drawn in the lower right corner. Students could use these memory tables as study tools to remember important morphemes. Pictures can be very effective memory tools. Here's a picture found on the membean.com site that provides lots of resources for teaching morphemes and vocabulary. In this case, the root tract means pull, and what better picture to depict the root tract than a tractor? By the way, the suffix "or" means that which. Therefore, the meaning of tractor is literally that which pulls. Morpheme trees can also be developed where the trunk displays the morpheme, in this case the prefix dis, D-I-S. Each limb represents one of the meanings related to the prefix dis. You can see here that the three meanings are not, apart, and away. Examples of words that have dis as a prefix are written on the appropriate limb, along with a sentence using the word. The roots represent trickster words that look like they may have the prefix dis, but the letters dis are actually a part of the root word. Feel free to push pause to take a closer look at this example of the morpheme tree. Here's a morpheme tree from the membean.com site that organizes the tree a bit differently. The root word is written on the roots of the tree. In this case, the root is path. All the various words that contain the root word path are pictured on the limbs of the tree. As you can see, just this one root word can be found in the 18 different words pictured on the tree. Knowledge of the root word path can lead to the understanding of a lot of different words. You can also have your students create word part wheels with the morpheme and its meaning in the center, and examples of words containing the morpheme, along with pictures depicting the words between the spokes of the wheel. This one was developed by a team of students, with each student contributing different spokes of the wheel. Make a Word is a fun activity you can do with your students. You could give them a set of flashcards with a different morpheme on each card. Or you could create short morpheme lists, something like this, to give to groups of students. The groups are then asked to use the morphemes on their cards or list to construct as many words as they can. The words can only contain a combination of the morphemes that students have been given. Go ahead and push pause for a minute and try to create words from the list of morphemes you see here. How many words did you create? Well, here's a few. This activity is a fun way to have students see that morphemes are found in multiple words and can be used in multiple ways. Practice worksheets and quizzes are also provided in the back of the instructor's manual. All of these materials are reproducible. There are 6 different prefix lessons with coordinating quizzes. The same holds true for suffixes and roots. The bottom line is that students will need a lot of practice to build their knowledge bank when it comes to morphemes and their meanings. Warm-up vocabulary activities at the beginning of class could include work with morphemes and practice mapping words. For a quick activity, you can place a full-size word map in a sheet protector and ask students to map a word using a dry erase marker. Walk around the room as students are working to provide feedback. When everyone is done, discuss the word and the process. Then have students erase the sheet and store in their notebooks to be used over and over. Although not all words can be mapped, there are a multitude of words that can be mapped. Helping students learn to identify recognizable parts in unknown words will give them a power of words that will not only boost their level of vocabulary acquisition, but will help them understand new words that they read. Here are a few good reads about vocabulary that you may want to add to your professional libraries. There are also lots of resources that can be found at these sites that provide a focus on vocabulary building. As we conclude today, I want to thank you so much for participating in the Word Mapping Strategy video series. Please take the time to complete the post-session evaluation via the link on your screen. Once you have completed the survey, you will earn your CEU, which will then be provided to you electronically. Once again, thanks for your participation, and I hope you have a great year with your students.